You know how to win a Formula 1 race. You've seen the start to victory finishes, you understand the strategy of winning. But how do you lose an F1 race? There are also as many races where wins have been taken away from teams and drivers, all because it's their own fault. So buckle in, because there's going to be a lot of head-in-hand moments in this video. Senna's record at Monaco is perhaps one of the best of any driver at any circuit. Some might say the best, but there's one glaring issue with that record, and that's perhaps the race in 1988. Although Senna performed one of the all-time great qualifying laps at Monaco this year, putting 1.427 seconds between himself and the rest of the field, including his eventual four-time world champion teammate. But as we all know in Formula 1 in 1988, there were no points for qualifying. Leading by almost an entire minute over his teammate come the last stages of the race, he would not obey team orders directly from Ron Dennis to slow up, as there was no possible way he could lose the victory at this point, right? Well, on lap 66, still pushing at the time, attempting to finish the race in the fastest time possible, he would lose the back end of his McLaren just before the tunnel, giving his teammate the win. Senna was not seen again by his teammate till that evening when the McLaren team was packing up. Just to give an idea of how dominant Senna was at Monaco, from 1987 to 1993, this would be the only Monaco GP he wouldn't win. Only down to his own uncharacteristically clumsy era, he would not achieve 7 wins in a row. Now, there are times where a driver understands the track situation a little bit better than their team, because they're on it or in it. But what the driver doesn't know is what's about to come, and Lando Norris will find that out the hard way on the Russian Grand Prix in 2021. After frankly brilliant qualifying session from the McLaren driver, he found himself sat on his very first pole position. In the mixed conditions, he would lose his maiden win in just 24 hours later. After defending his lead throughout the start against Carlos Sainz's Ferrari, and surprisingly enough, George Russell's Williams, he would then have to get to work with the defense of Lewis Hamilton's W12 Mercedes, with Max Verstappen starting at the back of the grid through engine changes. Lando would be Lewis's only target. Remember, this race took place in a different set of regulations, with cars that were still heavily affected by dirty air from the car in front, so Lando's job would become slightly easier when you remember that factor. Also remembering that this track that in 2017 played host to the race that had 0 on-track overtakes, so to say it could be difficult to overtake around the Sochi Autodrome would be an understatement. With the rain starting to come down within the last 7 to 8 laps, the circuit was getting slipperier as the laps ticked by, so as far as it was manageable for the race leaders. However, this intensity would dramatically increase within the last 5 laps at some point, so the winner of this race would be down to whomever would get the crossover to intermediate tires correct. With the first of the spinners being Lance Stroll in the tire barrier at turn 7, some were certainly adjusting better than others whilst on the slick rubber. The start of lap 50 was when Lewis would get his set of intermediate tires, himself not coming in when his teammate initially told him to, although his judgment was seemingly for the better, as it was just when he switched the rain would come down hard. Lando Norris, along with the likes of Leclerc that also tried to stay out, were absolutely no match for the rain that came down on lap 51, both skidding off at turn 5, with Lando handing his victory to Lewis Hamilton, which would be his 100th win. But we can see just from a few moments how undrivable those conditions were, with the rejection from Lando coming in for tires certainly costing him the race. Arguably one of the most unnecessary accidents in modern Formula 1. The crash between Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel at the 2010 Turkish Grand Prix, wiping out a certain 1-2 finish. Even though they were running extremely close to the McLarens behind, it looked all too certain that given the narrow lines throughout Istanbul Park and the nature of the cars in 2010, a pass would not manifest itself, with the only pass between the top 4 happening during the first set of pit stops, pushing Vettel's Red Bull RB6 into second place behind his teammate and in front of the rival McLaren of Lewis Hamilton, with Webber leading the 4 cars and the Ferraris not really being anywhere in this race in comparison. He was taking a little more out of his car every lap in the clean air, trying to stay in front. However, he would radio the pit wall on lap 39, asking Sebastian to back off, seeing as he had to start saving fuel. But this couldn't really be done looking at the proximity of both Lewis and Jenson Button in 4th. So in this situation, the burden would have fallen on Sebastian for the rest of the race to not only stay behind his slowing teammate, but to defend against the McLarens. Remember, at this point of the season, all 4 drivers are still fighting for the championship, so if the team could avoid giving orders, they would. On lap 40, Sebastian takes the situation into his own hands, getting a run on his teammate, utilizing the extra lap of fuel in higher engine mode to his advantage. On the run down to the last 3 corners, he pulls alongside the left-hand side of his teammate before pulling slightly ahead. And I know the driver ahead dictates the line, but especially considering Mark was his teammate at the time, you have to give a little more room. Personally, I always thought Sebastian was a little more at fault than Mark, although you have to let the drivers race at times considering these two were teammates running 1-2 and had two title rivals behind in Lewis and Jensen. To say this collision was an absolute calamity would be probably an understatement. Going from 43 points at the finish to just 15, Mark managed to limp home in third place, with Seb retiring on the spot. In an ideal world, Sebastian aids his teammate, defends in second place, obviously still not the best situation for Seb. And still, at the end of the day, second behind your teammate is better than not finishing at all. In 2005, we had the unique issue of teams not being able to switch tires unless there were vital issues. Only refueling was permitted in the pit stops, and as you can remember, this caused its fair share of issues and was abandoned in 2006. With Raikkonen in an immense fight for survival to stay ahead of Fernando Alonso's Renault, of which was catching at a rate of knots. His issues arise from earlier in the race. While navigating the Ford chicane on lap 30, he would run wide, damaging his barge board, causing him to lose a portion of his downforce and likely leading to his huge lockup was lapping a sudden Sauber that didn't exactly dive out of the way for blue flags, causing a mammoth flat spot on his right front tire, something that would eventually change the outcome of the race. Fernando Alonso had been making his own mistakes though, most notably running off at the Dunlop hairpin at the bottom of the circuit. Going to the last lap, the vibrations looked unbearable for Kimi, only just about to be able to keep the MP420 in a straight line as he went down the start-finish straight, and with Fernando fast catching him, only 1.5 seconds behind, he couldn't slow to look after the car either. But it didn't matter, the tire and the whole suspension assembly let go going into turn 1. Watching back at the slow-mo shot of the car before the suspension failure, you then understand why it gave out. And it was immense. Surely it would have been far better for Kimi in the long run to pit and finish second rather than not finish at all. Either way, in hindsight, it was still probably the biggest error in 2005 McLaren made for the title race. The 2004 Monaco GP was one of 3 races that wasn't won by a Ferrari in 2004. And although Michael Schumacher was leading during the safety car period, he wouldn't be by the end of it. In fact, he wouldn't be in the race at all by the end of the safety car period, and that was a direct result of the driver behind him, Juan Pablo Montoya. One of the more underrated Grand Prix of the 21st century, the 2004 Monaco Grand Prix was absolute chaos from start to finish, with 2 aborted starts, a flip, multiple mechanical failures, and some pretty amazing overtakes. It would be all topped off by safety car shenanigans, because of course it would. Not to mention Jaguar losing the 300,000K diamond in the wall. To start with what would be the 2 leading cars behind the safety car, here's some more context. Schumacher now found himself in the lead after a somewhat underwhelming race so far, falling all the way down to 6th place at the start in his usual dominant F2004 machine. The only way he could see a route to winning his Grand Prix was to gamble to stay out when Fernando Alonso and his brother Ralf Schumacher collided in the tunnel, a decision Montoya would also make, remaining just behind the German, but now in 1st and 2nd place respectively. Running extremely close to the back of Michael's car, albeit behind the safety car, he would get caught out at the right-hand kink in the tunnel when Michael braked sharply, and seeing as he was closer behind in an attempt to not be brake checked, he dived to the inside, clipping the Ferrari's right rear tire with the Williams left front, ending Michael's race on the spot, even if he eventually finished in 4th place. Given that Montoya would have had a far better chance at winning the race if this incident didn't happen, it would still qualify for this video, as well as Michael seemingly being overly hard on the brakes at the corner that is usually flat under green flag conditions, and seeing as this is in time with more primitive onboards because of the nature of where it was on the track. In the tunnel, the feed from both drivers were unviewable at this point. Given there were 2 relatively unclear views into the tunnel, the FIA decided to blame neither driver. However, now I think we can safely say, we can kind of blame both. Although there are all these ways to throw away wins, sometimes they're snatched from you instead of slipping through your fingers. In fact, Mika Hakkinen not winning the 2001 Spanish Grand Prix is certainly not the only example of this, but there's certainly an argument for it being the most agonizing. Mika had an underwhelming start to his 2001 campaign against his arch-rival Michael Schumacher, having not won any of the first 4 races, with Michael winning the first 2 back-to-back, and his teammate David Coulthard winning the Brazilian Grand Prix a couple rounds earlier. It's now crunch time for the Finn. Losing out to pole position by 0.085 seconds, things are looking good for the start of the race. Maintaining his position behind Schumacher through the start and further safety car restart, unable to overcome the Red Baron on track, he would leave the overtake to the second phase of pit stops, performing a fantastic overcut, going from 4 seconds back to 3 seconds in front of after Schumacher was unable to match his own previous pace from before the stop. By lap 65, Mika had extended his previous 3-second lead at lap 50 to a mammoth 40 seconds, being around 2 seconds lap faster than the reigning world champ. until his clutch let go, without any prior warning whatsoever, with just half a lap to go. Now, this situation has a severe case of it is what it is. But when your main rival for the past 3.5 seasons willfully admits on camera that he feels he shouldn't have really won that particular weekend, you get an idea of how close Mika was to ending an 8-race winless streak. Immediately going over to console the Fid when he got back to Parc Ferme, Michael Schumacher not celebrating as much as he normally would have. There's some absolutely agonizing incidents on this list, kind of happening within the last few laps of the Grand Prix, if not the last lap. But these are all things to keep on top of if you're going to win, as there are certainly more examples of seemingly preventable incidents taking away race wins. Lewis Hamilton in Germany 2019 springs to mind, maybe Max Verstappen at Brazil 2018, who could forget the 2 silver arrows smashing one another off the circuit at Barcelona in 2016. Many messes have happened in the past, and many more are still to come. After all, it's the nature of the sport, is it not?